everyone. My name is Reverend Jean-Marie, and I am the director for Racial Justice Ministries at Scarritt Bennett Center here in Nashville, Tennessee. Let me first start by saying to all the fathers and men who play fatherly roles in our community, happy Father's Day. Thank you all so much for all the ways you contribute to the village. There's an African saying that says it takes a village to raise children. So I want to first start by saying thank you to all of the fathers, all of the men who play fatherly roles, whether it's a biological father, godfathers, grandfathers, coaches, mentors, all the ways you contribute to our community and serving our children. Thank you, and happy Father's Day to you. Today is a special Father's Day show because as we continue these conversations around race, I think it's so important that we hear from Black men. And one of the fathers said it earlier today, oftentimes in any movement, Black women are the front runners in terms of moving and carrying movements where we see change. And so inviting the voices of men, Black men, to this conversation is so important because lived experiences, storytelling is part of our work here at Scarritt Bennett Center. So I want to say thank you to each and every one of our fathers who are here today, who are sacrificing their time with their family to be part of this show. I want to invite our audience. Today is a family show. And so I want to invite you to grab your children to come and share in this experience. Research show as early as 6 months, children can see the difference in skin color and texture. Research also showed before children can even talk, they are learning behaviors from their parents. And so if you are thinking that your child might be too young to have conversations around race and white supremacy and policing, research shows that as early as 6 months, they learn the difference in skin color and texture. Before they even speak, you're already teaching them, whether it's nonverbal or verbally, racist ways, or whether it's intentional or not, white supremacy, whether it's intentional or not. So I say all that to say it is not too early for you to have these conversations with your children about white supremacy and racism. I believe part of the major work that we need to do in this country is the impersonal and internal work we do with ourselves and with our families to dismantle racism. So again, I invite you to bring your children to be part of this conversation here today. And as always, radical hospitality is our way. And so you are invited to share your thoughts and questions in our comment section here at this live screen. Yet, while all of you all are welcome and difference of opinions is also welcome here in this space, this is sacred space. Difference does not mean disrespect or hate. And so any comments that reflect disrespect or hate will be deleted immediately. But we believe in caring for our guests while in our care. And so thank you again for joining us. And please show or share your comments and thoughts in the comment section. I'm excited about this show, and I want to introduce our moderator, the Reverend Dr. John Welch. I'm so grateful for him to be here, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Welch, if you would just start by introducing yourself and also sharing a little bit about the first time you learned you were going to be a father. Thank you all for being here, and now I turn it over to you, Dr. Welch.
Thank you, Sharizna, Reverend Sharizna. It's indeed an honor and a privilege, a pleasure to be here with this fine array of gentlemen on this Father's Day, as we have an open, honest, and transparent conversation of what it means to be fathers or to be raising children, Black children in this particular season. I am Reverend Dr. John Welch. I chair the board of the Gamaliel Network, which is a faith-based organizing network of congregations across the country, 17 states. 44 organizations, and I also serve as the vice president of Pittsburgh Theological Seminary here in the city of Pittsburgh. When I first learned that I was going to be a father, I was 27 years old and was a deacon in a Baptist church. My wife and I, we got married at the age of 25, and our first daughter was born while we were 27. We were the young couple in the congregation. We were active, we were worship leaders, we were choir directors, we were musicians. And so we were surrounded by love by that congregation. And when our first was to be born, when news came, you'd have thought that she was the child of the church, not just our child. And so they doted on her and they doted on us. And so it was an exciting time. And so I was certainly a proud dad. And my daughter still holds the picture, holds in her possession to this day, a picture of she and I. She was probably about 4 months old, and I'm staring in her face and she's staring back at mine, and it was a silhouette. And so precious memories, precious moments. And so I was indeed honored to be a father, then a young professional working at IBM at the time. And so back then we carried briefcases. We thought we were, the cat's meow as professional individuals. And so you couldn't tell me anything. I had my first car with a car seat in the back. And so as each child was born, we expanded from a car with a car seat to a minivan. I dreaded the minivan days. Don't ever want to go back to minivan days. But we had a great time hauling those kids to Bible study and prayer meeting and choir rehearsals. And they had their onesies and they lay in the front pew or the back pew with somebody. And so to this day, we're grateful that our children love the Lord and involved in various ministries of the church, but also are involved in things that they are passionate about as well, all of them involved in music. But let me say one other thing about this particular moment, because not only am I professional and a minister, but I'm also a victim of profiling, as I'm sure many of the brothers on this call are as well. As a head chaplain for Pittsburgh Police for 10 years, I had been profiled, and the thing that got me out of the situation was I was able to show a badge, and the officers politely just went on about their way. But not everybody can benefit from that situation. Even the chief of police at the time, who was African-American, was racially profiled and pulled over. And so it speaks to the bias within policing in our country. It speaks also to some of the racial elements or racism that has run rampant also within the policing. And so as we think about raising our children, as we think about raising our sons and daughters, as you will hear from some of the gentlemen, all of the gentlemen here who are fathers, some have daughters, some have sons, some have both, that there is a challenge. It is a challenge right now. And I have 3 grandchildren that I am concerned about in this season. What's the world going to look like for them? What are we going to leave behind for them? How challenging will it be for them? Are we still going to have race issues? Or is it going to be a colorblind society? Or are we going to slingshot back into the terroristic days of the mid 20th century when we had lynchings, but maybe modernized lynchings coming up? Are we going to fall back to the days when you had white militants who wanted to be deputized for justice? So these are perilous times. And so I'm hoping that in this conversation with the gentleman today, you'll hear from their perspectives of what it's like to be a father. You'll hear from their social locations of what they do, the challenges they face, and hopefully you'll be informed and maybe even transformed as well from our conversation. So I'm delighted to be here with these gentlemen. I'm delighted again to have been invited by Reverend Charisma St. Jean-Louis. So I'm going to turn over now. I'm going to ask each of the brothers on this call to sort of share, introduce themselves, and answer the same question that I was posed, that I answered. What was it like when you first heard you're going to be a father? So I'm going to start with Blake. Blake, if you would take a moment with us and just share what the moment was like for you when you heard you were going to be a father, after you say more about who you are for the audience.
Hello, everybody. My name is Brandon Blake, and I am a #GirlDad. I have 3 astounding girls. They are 9, 8, and 4. For 20 years, I've served as a senior pastor in Tennessee, Mississippi, and currently I serve the New Sunny Mount Church in St. Louis, Missouri. when I began to think about that particular question, how I felt the first time having a child, actually, there's a common thread in all three children, right? There's this anxious joy, this joyous anxiety, then there's the stage for me of fear, and then hope. I think that anxious joy is kind of natural to us all. For the last 9 years, let me also say I've been just the human playground around here, and I just got off duty about an hour ago, and I got to get back on duty after a while. But on February 7th of 2012, at 4:40 a.m., a 31-year-old Marine Sergeant, Brother Logan's, he was killed in Orange County by a sheriff deputy, while his 14 and 9-year-old daughters were sitting actually in the back seat. He was a Bible school teacher and just generally a good guy. His story resonates with me because on that same day at 9:38 a.m., my wife was giving birth to our second daughter, whose name is Brandy. Let me also just throw out here that my first daughter, her name is actually Brianna. So what's transpiring today, in light of what's happening, that could have been me. Those situations could have also been my children. So fear is important. Not the fear of feeding the kids, not the fear of changing diapers, but could I do this, right? Could I do this? Could I provide the adequate resources for these Black girls to not only survive, but thrive in a world that weaponizes their Blackness and also exploits their genders? So could I provide the resources financially, environmentally, emotionally, spiritually, so that they could thrive in society? This is what makes being a Black father in America today very, very, very unique. And thirdly, it's hope and faith, because I teach them that they cannot live in fear. I'm challenged here too, right? That I have to live in faith and hope, which is, I think, what brings me to the conversation. What role do I play in reshaping and shaping a world that accepts my daughters, but also in training and reminding them that their skin is beautiful, their hair is perfect, their mind is brilliant, their imagination is amazing. And I have to do this not only for my kids, but for other kids. Yes, with the strength of Christ, but also with the support of a community. And in my case, that community is the church.
Thank you, Brandon. You bring up an interesting point about the standard of beauty. Hopefully that'll come up in subsequent conversations too, that our children and even us, if we're honest, seem to have been malinformed by as we look at who was setting that standard. So I appreciate that comment that you made. Dante, father of one, introduce yourself and share the same response to that question.
I appreciate it. My name is Dante Bryant. I am a professor out in North Carolina at UNCC. I'm also a social activist and community organizer really all of my life. And I've spent the greater portion of my childhood and my adult life engaging in kind of social institutional transformation and trying to address issues of racial inequality. Again, my parents were social activists. I'm a social, I don't know how to do much else. So that's kind of where I'm situated in all of this. As far as my response when I first found out about that I was having a kid, it was intentional on my wife and I's part to have a kid. We were looking to do so. And I remember when we found out that, it was going to happen, right? And I remember finding out that I was going to have a girl. And I remember when she was born and just the amount of, and I think Blake touched on it earlier, right? The amount of excitement that I felt. I don't know that I felt that kind of excitement about anything throughout my life. But it was immediately followed by a palpable anxiety, right? And it wasn't just the anxiety of, oh, I'm about to be a parent. It was anxiety about, I'm about to be a parent to a Black girl in a society that is not only sexist and racist, but anti-Black, right? And I immediately began to think, like, what is my role in this? Like, how do I begin to prepare her to live in this space, right? And not, I take that back. How do I prepare her to survive and to live, right? And I draw the distinction between the two of those, because I do think, like, for particularly for Black parents, but people generally speaking, but particularly for Black parents, there is this kind of parental paradox that you have to negotiate, right? And it's culturally informed, right? And it has a lot to do with our children's proximity, geographical proximity to things that threaten their life, right? I think it was Elijah Anderson in Code of the Street. He talks about, like, we raise our children not just as it relates to the good in the community, but we also raise them as it relates to their proximity to things that might actually jeopardize their livelihood, right? And we have to prepare them to not only deal with good people, but also deal with the people who threaten them, right? And we all do this as parents. And so I'm thinking about all of this, and I'm thinking about the fact that my daughter, I don't just have to prepare her to be able to identify, engage, and manage bad people, right? Who threaten her life, right? And what I mean by threaten her life, like threaten her psychologically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, right? Just anything that tries to break down who she is comprehensively as a person, right? And so I have to teach her how to survive, which means recognizing these bad people. But because of how she shows up, I also have to teach her how to identify and recognize systems that do the same thing, right? I have to teach her to understand that the educational system that she's in will marginalize and decentralize her experiences, her aesthetics, her social reality, and ultimately, like, her epistemological understanding of the world, right? I have to teach her that the medical institution she engages in, no matter how educated she is or how wealthy she is, if she chooses to have a child, there's a 3 to 5% chance, she's 3 to 5% more likely than her white counterpart, who could be poor, white, and uneducated, that my daughter's 3 to 5 times more likely to die during childbirth or during pregnancy, right? I have to teach her to identify these systems that will also attempt to take her life, right? And the paradox and the fear for me comes in, and not in teaching her how to survive and how to protect and shield herself, but also recognizing that simultaneously, I have to teach her how to live, right? Which requires the exact opposite type of engagement. It requires vulnerability, it requires openness, it requires access, it requires willingness to engage with the very things that might very well take your life, right? And so, like, trying to balance that survival with living, and by living I mean, like, being able to have love, intimacy, deep relationships, like all of the things that make life what it is. And it's like, how do you prepare your child to both protect themselves and remain vulnerable when everything around them, right, mm-hmm. ultimately serves as a threat to their lives? And so that was the fear, and what I still wrestle with, right?
Sure.
That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, it's Professor Dante dropping epistemology out there in the discourse. Appreciate that, man. And let's be mindful. We are being reminded that we have 3 to 5 minutes for the introduction, so let's be mindful of our time. So Travis, if you would share, father of 2, introduce yourself and respond to the same question.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Travis Miller Sr. As stated, I am a father of two. Um, I cried. The moment that my wife told me, and the way that she went about telling me, she knew that I wanted to do things right in a traditional way of, as far as being married, and then having the children, not having a child outside of wedlock. I was able to do that. So, my wife went about putting together this entire little scenario for me. Like, I come home from a long day's work, and we had been trying to have a child, and it didn't seem like it was going to happen. And when it did happen, and the way she presented everything to me, as I'm reading what she wrote and understanding the things that she's given me, and as it started to click for me, the tears just came out, because this is fatherhood is something that I've always wanted, because I wanted the opportunity to give my children everything that I had, and also the things that I didn't have. And so my wife, I have a 9-year-old daughter now. She's my pride and joy. And then we took some time in between. My daughter kind of set us up. My daughter made us think that parenting and child raising is the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah.
And so, she made it feel like, especially those first couple of years of life, my daughter is so intelligent. She was talking early, she was walking early. So me and my wife looked at each other like, oh, we got this in the bag. And all I need now is a little boy. That little boy of mine, my son, the greatest thing that I can do to start off was give him my name. And so that he knows not just who he is, but who his father is. He'll always have that first reminder of who his father is and was once I'm long and gone from this earth. But that son of mine has really challenged every last thing. As a matter of fact, he's trying to come into the door right now. He's on cue. He has perfect timing. And here he is. TJ, go back out. Go back out. Close the door, okay? Perfect timing. Like, hey, you can't hide. And here he comes back with the ball. But yeah, my son and my daughter has been two totally different things. And with my son, we were able to. All right, go by. That's my son. But with him, we were able to enjoy this time. So with my wife, I was 33 when I had my daughter, but we were struggling and everything. So when we had our son, when we got pregnant with our son, we had actually had a miscarriage the year before. So he's our rainbow baby. And we were able to do a gender reveal and things like that. And so when we found out that it was a little boy, his name was already decided on. There was not a question. There was not a, well, what's the possibility? His name was his name before he was even conceived. So to find out that we were having a boy, I fell to my knees and I cried, because now this is the opportunity to do with my son that I wish that my father had done with me. And so, fatherhood has been probably one of the greatest things and joys, but I cried. I cried hard, and my kids brought out a tenderness in me that I didn't know existed prior to having kids.
Amen. Very good. You're putting fatherhood on display.
Amen.
Definitely have to. As you can see, I had the door closed, and I can't lock it, but he's done figured out how to open up doors now.
That's
So
all
I'm talking about you.
We heard it. This is a family affair, so let them all in. I'm going to go with Jeffrey. If you would introduce yourself and respond also.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Welch. I'm Jeffrey Mccune. I am a professor by training, but a father also by training. My children, I think, train me every day. And so one of the things that I'm learning, the question of when did you choose, when did you find out you were a father is a very interesting question for me, because that moment was when I saw, at the time, my 6-year-old son sitting on a stoop in Pensacola, Florida, not knowing how to read and not knowing how to do his math. And he was the nephew of my partner. And so my partner, we walked in and he was sitting there frustrated with his math. And I looked at the kid and I said, what's wrong? What's wrong with you? And he said, I don't know this. I don't know this. And I said, you do know it. You do know it. And we sat for an hour doing fractions, teaching him how to put these things together. And for me, that was the moment at which I became his father. I didn't know that a year later that he would be in my custody. I didn't know that a year later that I would have to be thinking intentionally about how is it that I'm going to teach this young man to not only be a young man, but to grow up in a world where he understands himself as a person who can affirm the family in which he would belong, which would now be the family of my partner and I, a same gender loving family. How could I raise Black men who didn't do the things that I saw other young Black men do to me when I was younger, calling me punk and sissy and things like that? How do I raise a young Black man who could love on my sisters and my sisters, meaning my sisters, my Black sisters, the way that I thought that they deserved to be loved? How do I raise a feminist young Black man who grew up in an environment till he was 6 that was quite the antithesis of gay affirming or feminist, right? How do I raise someone who can be strong in his own composition to tell his friends today at the age of 13 when they say things that are off kilter? No, we don't do that. I didn't know I was raising that kid at 6, right? When I saw him on that stoop. And so I started there with my young son, Escobar. And now I have a 5-year-old, he turned 5 a couple weeks ago, Caleb, who when we found out that he was coming into the world, we were not surprised. This was actually more planned, right? In the traditional way that Travis was talking about. And when that moment came, it was a different kind of moment, but it was similar, because I believe that parenting is intentional. And so what I've practiced in my life is intentional mentorship. And so I just took that intentional mentorship idea and put it into parenting. And one of the things that was true for me that I realized is really important is that I came from my mother and my father, right? Which means that I have each of them inside of me, which for me, being a father means tapping into both of those energies, right? How do I figure that out and give that to my children so that they don't ever feel without energy, right? And so of course they definitely need sisters and brothers in their circle that are outside of their parents, right? That's always true. But it's also important that my household understands masculine and feminine energy as being part of the balanced energy that we have. And so what I've done is over and over again, I'm rereading The Conscious Parent, which is a great book, but I'm also rereading scripture and thinking about who was Jesus? How did Jesus teach? I'm not gonna preach today. But I'm also thinking about all the many ways in which my mother and father taught me without ever teaching me. And so, of course, now I'm dealing with a teenager and a 5-year-old, and both of them are, I have to say, two of the most impulsive cats you can ever meet. But I'm dealing with impulse and trying to teach them how to navigate that. But it's been a beautiful journey, and I hope that it continues to be a beautiful journey. And so for me, it was a choice, right? All day I've been thinking about what does it mean to choose parenting, right? To choose it, right? So that it's not accidental, right? That it's intentional and that it's of your choosing, which means it's also of your design in many ways.
Right, right.
And that means the environment, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey, for sharing that. Ashford, Welcome.
Hey, thanks everybody. Happy Father's Day. Thank you for having me. My name is Astrid Hughes, Senior. I currently serve as the Executive Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Metro Nashville Public Schools. And I'm also the co-director of our Nashville My Brother's Keeper Network. When I first found out that my wife and I were going to have our first child, to be frank, I was scared. And I was scared based off of some of my own personal constructs that, growing up in my life that I saw. And the magnitude of manhood for me was, will I be able to provide for my family, financially provide? Will I be able to emotionally provide for my family? Specifically coming out of a single parent household. My mother raised me, my grandmother helped raise me along with my mother. I have 4 other aunts, 3 uncles, and the women in my family really held us down. And it was always ingrained in me that as a man, the roles and responsibilities that I needed to project. And to be honest with you, as I've learned and grown over time, and in the work that I'm doing with the young men that I work with, those constructs have not always been productive for our community. Black men finding their value within the constraints of providing financially is not that all men should be worried about doing as men for our young people. But I was fearful not only because of what it meant to be a father and was my station in life going to provide for them, but because I never saw a father in the home, would I be able to mentally, emotionally steer this young man to where they needed to be? When we found that I was having my second child, and we named our first child Astrid because I always wanted to have a seed that had my name so that he could carry on a lineage of a strong man. We named my second child Sydney because I'm a big fan, and we're big fans of Sidney Poitier and what Sidney Poitier meant to the Black community during the point in time where folks were standing up and fighting for equity and inclusion. Where I come now, teaching my son is a lesson my uncle, who was a father figure to me, always taught me, that you can't feed a baby collard greens. So when I'm teaching my son, I take him along the line, step by step, without feeding him too much to overwhelm him. But the first thing that I began to teach my 7-year-old son and now my 18-month-old son, and everything that I teach in my mentorship programs with these young men, is that the construct of power, the construct of individuality begins in the mind. We have to grow our young men, and I make certain to grow my young son to be a thinker, to be a critical thinker, so that he can self-identify his own role, his own space in this place, and then he can begin to live within that. Because of what has taken place, I've tried to and have moved forward to speak with him on issues of race, but I know that his mind can comprehend all of that. So we talk about it in different constructs. But the way I want to continue to show up for our young men is to really challenge so that they can examine everything around them. Even Black and white is a construct that benefits one over the other. So how are we really breaking this down for our young people to understand and realize where they are in this place and time? And as a man thinketh, a man is. And that's the way that I want to show up for my 2 young sons that will be strong men that speak. I teach my youngest or my oldest, he has affirmations that he says every day. And we make certain that he goes through those affirmations on a regular basis.
That's serious indoctrination. That's good stuff. Appreciate that, Astrid. Brandon, father of 3.
How y'all doing? I'm Brandon McCormick. I'm a professor of Pan-African Studies at the University of Louisville in Louisville, Kentucky. Also been accused of being a preacher every now and then, so hope y'all don't hold that against me. But I am a father of 3. It's interesting listening to you brothers speak of your experiences because I resonate with so much of what's already been said. But it also is interesting that my experience have been multiple. When I first found out I was going to be a father, it was an immediate thing because I chose to marry a woman who already had a child, right? And so I came into a situation where I was a father immediately. And I got married very young, 24 years old. I think I was 24. And at that point, knowing that I didn't much know what I was doing myself as a man coming into my own manhood and trying to figure out how to be a man and how to be a husband and these kinds of things. And so I probably really wasn't ready for fatherhood. So there was a lot of anxiety there trying to figure out, what does it mean to be a father to this young child? What does it mean to be a father negotiating a situation where his biological father is still very much in the equation and there's a good amount of friction and tension still with my wife and his biological father, right? And trying to negotiate that, and sometimes playing mediator and peacemaker and trying to parent and trying not to overstep boundaries as the quote unquote stepdad with the biological dad. So there was all of these dynamics and question marks and trying to figure out what that meant. I had just lost my own father. I grew up in a house with a father, but I lost my father when I was 20. And so, as coming into adulthood, right? Now, my father had married my mother who already had a child. So it would have been great to have him around to have those conversations to figure out how to navigate that, but he wasn't there. So it was trying to figure out this on my own, right? So those were a number of questions at that time. It really helps, and maybe I'll be the first one to invoke Black women here. It really helped to be married to a Black woman who was already an amazing mother, right? And a Black woman who herself was an early childhood educator, so knew a lot about not only being a great mother, but also what it meant to pour in and to educate young children, right? And so I had the benefit of that, so I could be a better father being married to a woman who was already a good mother and an early childhood educator. When I first found out that I was going to be a biological father, I was very excited about that, and finding out it was going to be a girl. So when I was young, this is all before Bill took his turn, but I come up watching The Cosby Show, and I was always enamored by young Olivia, her character on that show. And so when I found out I was going to have a little girl, I wanted to have a little girl that was precocious like Olivia Huxtable with the little afro puffs on either side. And so I'd imagined this whole scenario where I was going to be a father to this little girl, and I was very excited about that. This was in 2005. So this is pre-Black Lives Matter. This is pre-social media. This is pre us being inundated with all of these images of, police and vigilante violence. And so those things were not on my mind at that time. The questions were very similar to what you all were saying in terms of the anxiety. Am I up for this task of being a parent? Do I have the skills and the wisdom and the resources to do that well? 10 years later, when my son was born, when I found out I was going to have my son, that's a whole other conversation, because we knew we were done having children and I was not expecting to have another child. And so those things happen sometimes. So at that moment, it was like, man, I'm older now. I'm not trying to be a father again, but here he comes into the world, this ball of joy and energy. And he comes now post Black Lives Matter. He comes in this moment where there is so much anxiety about parenting, and now he's going to be a boy, right? And now I've got to figure out how to raise this young Black boy, and that has been a very different type of challenge. As I was saying before, the challenge now, he's 4 years old, is to figure out how to keep the light and the joy and the smile on his face. When we talk about that Black boy joy, how do you keep that alive right now, right? As we're living through this moment and not having very intense conversations with him about race and Black death and all of these kinds of things, but trying to pour into him the resources and the foundation that he needs. So the children books that feature Black characters and get him culturally rooted and grounded and affirmed in what it means to know that he is loved and he's special and he's brilliant and he has gifts and talents and that he's amazing, so that no one can ever tell him and convince him otherwise. Right. So that when it's time to have the more serious conversations about what it means to be a young Black man in the world, he already has the sense of grounding and the cultural repertoire that he will need to negotiate that. So I'll stop there for now, and we'll talk more later. But those are my thoughts on those initial moments of finding out I'd be a father.
Okay. Thank you. Those affirmations are extremely important, as Ashford shared earlier as well. So we're getting behind our time, and so I want to move to Darius. And Darius, if you could do the same as the brothers before you, introduce yourself and respond to the question in as concise a manner as possible. And want to move to bringing in Mr. Lee shortly thereafter. So, Brother Darius.
Thank you, Dr. Welch. Greetings, brothers. So I have two children, 7-year-old daughter, Dahlia, and a son who just turned 1 last month. So it was August 2012. My wife was coming in from work. I was getting ready to leave the house to go to the church because we were in the midst of revival. And she says to me, she's pregnant. I really didn't have the time to process it because I had to get to the church for revival. But I do recall when I sent her down, the feelings of my own resident alienhood really came on me, right? Born in the Bahamas, post-independent, post-colonial Bahamas, and never felt circumscribed as to what I could be, irrespective of our socioeconomic status and poverty. I saw leaders who looked like me, who rose to prominence despite humble beginnings. And so my first years, 5 to 6 years, did not have the construct of race really superimposed upon it until we moved to Massachusetts. And in the elementary school where I'm one of 3 Black students, you know, the shocker of that reality set in. And I began to think about what that was going to be, raising a child who had West Indian heritage and still had to navigate the space of Blackness in America. So much so that the date of her dedication was the Sunday, just the day after the acquittal of George Zimmerman, who killed Trayvon Martin. And I remember the tears I cried in that service, right? Just the mixture of tears of joy for my child, but the tears of sorrow and pain and suffering. We named her Dahlia Marie. That really means a flower that grew in a valley of bitterness and sorrow. For the year of her conception was the year I lost a 7-year-old godson suddenly and lost a second brother at 34. And so it was a painful year emotionally for me to really struggle through. And out of it comes this source of hope and joy in the midst of despair that continues to be with me. And so fast forward now, we are in Huntsville, Alabama. I'm pastoring a congregation here. And we were intentional about where we wanted to live, especially as Dahlia started to grow. We wanted Black excellence to be commonplace so that she understood every bit of her potential and possibility, that it was rooted in something that would inspire and be hopeful rather than something that would look to be in deficit and negativity.
Right.
And we continue to do that now for our son so that both of them can be who God wants them to be.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Last but not least, the eminent Reverend Starsky Wilson.
Thank you. I take eminent just to mean that I'm here and present. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share. I'll be brief. As we talk about kind of the prompt of what it felt like the moment that we found out that we would be fathers, I found myself in that moment in 2004. At the time, I had been, father figure to several because I was a youth pastor at Greater Mount Carmel Missionary Baptist Church here in St. Louis. At the same time, I was the president, 27 years old, president of an urban league in Southern Illinois, and going through my first year in that urban league presidency, which ended up also being my last year in that urban league presidency, wrestling with the realities of professional shift and change, wrestling with the reality of nurturing a community of kids who I was the youth pastor for. My wife was in dental school at the time in Southern Illinois. And so she was, of course, wrestling through the difficulty of that professional situation. And here came the joyous anxiety some others have spoken of being a father. And so the message for me, quite frankly, in that moment was, it's time to grow up. I talked early in his life, my son Starsky too, about the need for children to round us out. I had been professionally advanced. I'd held some pretty good positions for an early career, but I still needed to grow up in some things. And I think the reality of that moment was there's some things that needed to be rounded out in my adult experience, and only parenting would be able to do that. Fast forward 10 years from 2004 to 2014, now I am the president of Deaconess Foundation, a philanthropy in St. Louis that's focused on child well-being. And I'm the pastor of St. John's Church, the beloved community, interracial inner city congregation trying to grow people as disciples to love Jesus and justice. And all hell breaks loose in our town in August of 2014 when Michael Brown is killed and lay dead in the street for 4.5 hours. And I'm running errands with now my 3 boys in the back seat of my car. I didn't have to move yet, Dr. Welch, because they were small boys. I didn't have to move to the minivan yet. I was avoiding that spirit as long as I could. So then the three boys are in the back seat of the Volkswagen sedan. And I'm running errands after picking them up from school. And I'm trying to keep the language and keep the story of Michael Brown's death from around them. But I'm in St. Louis, and I'm listening on the radio to figure out what's going on in NPR. And Starsky at 9 years old says from the back seat, "Daddy, every time I hear about Michael Brown, my stomach starts to hurt." Now this boy grows up with the reality of 2 parents with college degrees, with advanced degrees. The number one indicator of the well-being of a child in America is the professional level of education of the mother. He's got a mama who has a doctoral degree. This boy is largely going to be all right. But when he hears about the trauma of the reality of an 18-year-old boy being cut down, 18-year-old Black boy being cut down, he exhibits the characteristics, the traits, and the symptoms of toxic stress. His stomach starts to hurt. And so for me, fundamentally, quite frankly, what it means to be a father, to raise Black children in America, is to manage that raising them means raising oneself, raising one's consciousness, and preparing oneself for something that is not yet. The other thing that it is wrestling always with toxic stress and trauma in them, quite frankly, and in me. And so I'm grateful to be doing that, partnered with, to what my brother Brandon said, quite frankly, partnered with a woman who knows what parenting looks like, who knows what marriage looks like, because I grew up, hadn't seen him since I was 3, didn't see the negotiation of marriage in my household. And so I was grateful to be married to somebody who has seen that happen before, who has seen what that meant. And quite frankly, at the time of my son's birth, my first son's birth, to have the mentorship of my father in love, who has since gone on to be with the Lord. And so without that community, I don't know that I could have made it this far. And I'm grateful for a community of these kind of brothers who are helping me to make it to the next level.
Wow. Thank you, Reverend Starsky. Toxic stress. I think we're going to have a pretty deep conversation here today. And I know Reverend Wilson is not going to be able to stay with us long, but hopefully he'll be with us for a good portion of our segment. And I think the issue of toxic stress, in which you just shared regarding what your son articulated, I think is a good segue into introducing Mr. Mark Lee. Mr. Mark Lee's resident of Nashville, Tennessee, father of 6, 61-year-old father, who he himself was a recipient of news that none of us want to receive, and that his son was killed at their hands while in police custody. So I want to bring in Mr. Wilson at this time and have him also say more about himself and respond to that question of what was it like when you first heard you were going to be a father, but also I'd like for him to share just what was that moment like too when he received that news, understanding that his son Jaquez was killed in police custody. So welcome to the conversation, Mr. Lee. Introduce yourself, please. And you have to unmute yourself. Charisma, maybe you can provide assistance here to unmute Mr. Lee.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we got you.
Okay, all right. How y'all gentlemen doing? Happy Father's Day to all of those that have fathers. My name is Mark Lee. Like I said, I'm 61. I have 6 children. They all grown now, thank God. When I first found out that I was going to be a father, I was scared because we was both 17 years old, and we didn't know nothing about parenting. When she came into this world, you know, thank God that I had my mom and my sisters to back me up, because if it wasn't for my mom, I don't know what we'd have done, you know, basically, you know. But once that she came into this world and I held her, it became a reality that I was a father, you know, that I have to grow up and be a father, because my mom couldn't take care of her because that was my responsibility. Before as Jaquez, when me and my wife found out that he got shot by the police, he was at work, I was at the house. Jaquez's girlfriend called and she was hysterical, you know, trying to tell her what happened to Jaquez. So she called me and told me to come and get her from work. So I came and got her, and as we got on Murfreesboro Road, she said, "Baby, our son is gone." I said, "Well, you can't say that because we don't know what's really happening. Just we get to the hospital," she said, "I know my son's gone. I know my child." You know, I said, "Well, just hold on. We get there," you know. And lo and behold, as soon as we got to the emergency room at Vanderbilt, you know, this guy walked up to us and said, "Who is Jaquez's family?" And we raised our hand, and he said, "Come on, let's go into this little room they had on the side over there." And he come in now, and we sat down, and he was talking about, well, you know, they got him on the table, and they working to trying to bring him back, and then she said, "Well, I already know my son is dead. Won't y'all just go on and tell the truth?" So he said, "Yeah, he died about 30 minutes ago." But he was already dead before they got him to the hospital. But
wow,
they was trying to make us feel good, like they was trying to save his life.
Yeah.
But he already had passed on before they got him in the ambulance.
And your wife knew that.
Yeah, so it was chaos. I mean, for me, I was numb, just like my wife was, because it didn't make no sense. You know, what they said that this officer shot him for, it really didn't make no sense. And we tried and we tried to wrap our minds around, well, what did he have? What did this officer say to him to make him want to run away from him? What did he do? But he said that he ran a stop sign, but he couldn't see Jacquees's car because he was coming over a hill. But still to the day, I don't understand why this man just up and shot him 3 times in his back. You know, but they say he had a gun, but they never showed it to us.
And to this day, so what does the
to this
continuum
day.
of justice look like right now? So
They didn't charge the officer with anything. They let him go. You know, we didn't get to file nothing in the courts because the lawyer that we had, he didn't represent us. He waited till 3 days before the statute ran out for filing the petition. He waited till 3 days before that to come to our house and tell us that he wasn't gonna file anything in the court because the forensics showed that Jacquees's DNA was on this gun or something, but they never did show us the gun. So we've been struggling with that, you know, and I've been trying to make sure that she's not thinking about what's gonna happen, and we just trying to move on, you know. I'm making sure that she thinks about it, you know, and I see her thinking about it. I go to her and I say, okay, well, you go on in the room, you take 30 minutes or an hour, and then after that, I'm coming to get you. Because I don't want you to be walking around here like some of the other mothers that's in Moms Over Murder. You know, they taking this so hard because they didn't have nobody behind them to lift them up when they got down or feeling down on that day.
Sure.
So I made sure that everything that she needed, that I was there for me talking to her inviting me, how she feel, you know, about our son getting murdered. You know, I talk to her every day. She talked to me. She let me know how she feel. You know, I said, well, okay, it's time for me to get out front. But more than likely, it was time for her to get out front because she done more, they done more than we done. But still, I'm trying my best to make sure that all men don't go through the same hurt and the same distance that they put on their wives or their girlfriends or whatever, you know, because they need us in their lives.
Yeah.
Instead of they being the mama and the daddy, you know, just be the mom. You know, let me be the dad. You know? But they can't do that because ain't nobody there but just them. You know, it's okay for you to go out there and get a child, you know what I'm saying? But raising them, you know, being in their lives, let them know that you love them just as much as their mama loved them.
So what is it? So you know, you talked about how you care for your wife when she's really having difficult moments, thinking about here it is 3 years and this miscarriage of justice. What about you? You know, how are you handling this? This is Father's Day today. I don't know the actual date when Jacquees was killed, but you know, that's a marker in time. And so when that day comes or when Father's Day comes around, how do you cope? How do you handle this?
Well, I think about him a lot, you know. You know, I think about the good things that he done, you know, how silly he was, you know. He always thought he was a master cook on the grill, you know, and me and him, we sat down and we talk about a whole lot of things that he done in his life, you know, just the good times, you know.
Yeah.
I really don't try to dwell on too much on the negative part of it.
Sure.
Because I know it's not gonna make the situation any better. You know,
Yeah.
me trying to make it through this day.
Right. Well, let me invite the other brothers back into the conversation because they may have some things to weigh in on this particular issue itself. You know, Starsky talked about the toxic stress that is endemic within our society, what we go through, what our kids are going through, what we go through as parents. And so you speaking from your own personal experience of having lost a son while in police custody, and regardless of the circumstance, losing a child is difficult, but losing a child in police custody is getting a lot of attention these days, for sure. And so as our fathers have just now rejoined the conversation, I invite you all to sort of weigh in, particularly. Let's pick up with where Starsky left off, and this trauma that is endemic in our communities, in our families, and even in our kids. Our children pick up things, as Starsky articulated earlier. They pick up things, sometimes unbeknownst to us, until they speak themselves. And so when Starsky's son said, "My stomach hurts," every time he hears about Michael Brown, that's a reality. And so, I'm surrounded by pastors and professors here on this call. So speak to me, people.
Well, I guess I'll jump in there. I'll say for me, toxic stress really, really hit home a lot just now. Just thinking that, May 11th started out as a normal day for me, May 11th, 2020. I'm a truck driver by profession. I was just doing my job, doing what I normally do, doing what I can to provide for my family on a day-to-day basis, like I always have. And, at the completion of my last stop, my world really, changed. Just for the simple fact that the situation that I had, it took me from being on the outside, seeing the videos of how, especially with the Ahmaud Arbery video being the latest video for us to come out, even though it happened before Breonna Taylor, but to be put in that same type of situation where I had two gentlemen who decided that I was doing something wrong, I was doing something I wasn't supposed to be doing, or I was someplace where I didn't belong, really forced me to think, to really react and respond, but think my way through these things, and to know myself and know that how my anger and things like that of that nature work, and so that I could make sure that I made it back home to my family at the end of the night, because I have a 2-year-old son and a 9-year-old daughter that I have to raise, and I had to make sure that I did everything possible to make sure that I get home, and to have to be, it's, I guess I can say unfair to be put in that type of situation where you think in order to make sure that you preserve your life, that you have to record. And then when he mentioned that he was calling the cops, like, okay, I need to go on Facebook Live or something so that I have multiple witnesses to what's going on. So God forbid if things turned negative and went wrong for me, that I would have video evidence out there of what I did say, what I didn't say. And I didn't know it was going to go viral. I was just doing it so that I can protect myself in case the gentleman called my job and tried to say that I did X, Y, Z, and I can show and prove that I did A, B, and C. But it just took on a life, an experience of its own that I did not know was going to happen, that I was not prepared for to happen. But it's
So for the benefit of those viewing, because you shared some of this with us earlier before we went live, for the benefit of those who are viewing, and you compared your situation to the Ahmaud Arbery situation, say something if you can, specifically what happened to you that you're alluding to.
On May 11th, 2020, I was, in case people who haven't seen the video, I'm a truck delivery driver. I deliver appliance and furniture to residential and commercial. On that particular day, I was doing residential deliveries. And I had completed my last delivery of the day when a resident inside this gated community that I was delivering to first approached me off camera before I started recording to ask me where I was going, where I was coming from, how did I get in here, and who gave me a gate code. Never made it an issue about the truck. He made it an issue about the individual in the truck, which is myself and my coworker, who was also a Black man. And so we had about a 45-minute standoff on camera, to whereas he called the cops and he was made threats that he didn't make threats. He actually did call the police and reported to them that I was trespassing in a 28-foot tractor trailer with company logos on it, company logo on myself, and somebody that he lives with stopped behind us where we delivered at. So she knew that we were making a delivery, went home and told him, and he came out to confront us. So it was a tough situation to be put in, especially because I live in Oklahoma. I'm originally from New Jersey, but I live in Oklahoma now. And a lot of people don't know that Oklahoma is an open carry, a constitutional carry state. So you do not need a permit to carry a gun. As long as you, in simplest terms, as long as you don't have a felony, you can carry a gun. So I had to deal with and wrestle with the fact that I had a gentleman who was considerably smaller than I was, and his friend who was considerably smaller than I was, in a truck that was smaller than the one I was driving, but was brave enough and had enough belief in his conviction that I was doing something wrong to block me in and have confidence that nothing was going to happen to him. So the entire time that everything was going on, I had to sit there and I had to constantly tell myself, stay calm, stay in the truck. Because I had the fear that if I got out the truck, things would have not gone well for me. I either could have gotten shot if he was carrying. I don't know. He never brandished, showed that he had a firearm on him. His buddy never showed if they had a firearm on him. But the second thing is that if I got out the truck and he didn't have a gun and things escalated and I, for whatever reason, put hands on him, then I'm gonna be arrested for assault and battery. So I had to keep just reminding myself to stay calm, stay in the truck, because I had a family I needed to get home. I knew I had responsibilities at home that if I make one wrong choice, one wrong move, they lose a father. My wife loses a husband. My mother loses a son. My sister loses an older brother. My nieces and nephews lose an uncle, and I have friends that lose a friend.
Yeah.
And, I have to constantly have these scenarios and things running through my mind. And then also at the same time, I was dealing with grief because I had just lost my grandmother and my aunt literally 5 and 3 days before. So to have that kind of grief and to be dealing with the anger on the top of it, and then, had to really fight within myself to make sure that I stayed calm, that I stayed in control. And then he was even trying to get myself to calm down even more for when the police show up is not any kind of misperception that I'm an angry Black man instead of a hurting Black man who, dealing with death. So it was a lot to deal with, but, you see these things for the last several years, like the Mike Brown, the Ahmaud Arbery, the George Floyd situations, and you think to yourself, man, what do I do if I'm ever in that situation?
Yeah.
How do I get out of it? And then for me to actually have that situation and actually have to go through it and have to figure it out as I'm going through it to make sure that I humble myself so that I can get home to my family. And, I count it as a blessing that to God that I'm still here, that things did not go left, it didn't go wrong, and that I'm able to be here for my children. I'm able to be here for my birthday, which was that Saturday after, and that I'm able to be here for another Father's Day. That things that I probably didn't think much of now has a bigger meaning, a greater meaning to me now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you definitely shared layered stress.
Yeah.
No doubt. Darius.
Yeah, I mean, what is the common thread, not just in Travis's story, and solidarity with you, Brother Lee, for sharing your story of losing your son. But what I can't get over is the fact that there is an entirely different playbook for parenting Black children, separate from the everyday issues of raising children, and how a situation that Travis describes can happen at on any given moment, on any given day, anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Not just being in the wrong place, the wrong time, but that could be visited upon you even when you are at your home, as it pertains to Breonna Taylor, asleep. A reality that could be brought to bear upon us, and I mean, I want to say, damn, right? That's the reality that we have to contend with. That we don't get to just have the emotions of excitement about new life and joy, and what we've got to now help them have social interpretive skills beyond, I mean, just to exist and to survive and to make it home, and how that becomes such an ongoing trauma that's carried in Black DNA that wearies our souls.
Yeah.
I mean, Brandon was making
At
it.
some point, you gotta, like, when do we get to exhale, man?
Yeah.
When do we get to, you know what I'm saying? Just, yeah.
Right now.
I mean, Brandon was talking about, if I recall, Brandon, you were talking about the distinction of teaching your daughters about living versus survival. And
that was me.
Did you, Dante?
Yeah.
So, because as you said, Darius, there's a separate playbook about, how we live as Black people, apart from just how we just live as people in general. Dante, you want to say more about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it, and all of us have touched on this, right? Is all of us, part of the reason why we're still here is because our parents had to educate us in this way, right? And now we are in the position that they were once in, right? Is now we're having to pass this kind of generational knowledge of survival, right? Not just living, but survival on to the next generation. And it does, I mean, and if you mess that up, right? Like if you teach your children to live, right? To be vulnerable, to engage, to love, and to accept without question, then because of who they are and how society identifies them, the systems that they live in, the world that they live in, will kill them, right? Even if physically, it's mentally, it's emotionally, it's spiritually, and it will strip them of the ability to live, right? But conversely, if we just teach them how to survive, right? Now they're here in this world, but they're not able to engage in the love and in the intimacy and the connections that actually make life worth living. So, I mean, trying to wrestle with those two realities, like Darius said, I mean, it's a lot of other people don't have to make those kind of decisions and choices, right?
But I wonder, could I add something there? I wonder about trauma, and I wonder about healing. Like, how do we, I do think we spend a lot of time, because the state is constantly killing us, right? We spend a lot of time talking about what the state is doing. But I want to talk a little bit about, like, some of the healing work that we do. I believe in therapy, right? I believe that we don't talk about it enough, but when you live in a society where people are always coming at you, my young 13-year-old, every single year he's been with me, every year there's a teacher who thinks that he's not capable. Every year there's a teacher who thought he did something that he did not do. That is a disgusting way to go through life without being able to process it. And you can't just always process that with your parents, right? Because you all know this, right? We remember, we walked 20 miles, right? That helped us only so far. But when we heard it from Uncle Bobo or a mentor, we were like, oh, I get it, right? And so for me, some of the question is, what are some of the therapeutic things that we can do to get our young children access to therapy? And I know a lot of people feel like, oh, therapy is too early. It is never too early to have someone to talk to. and the process, right? The therapist knows what not to do. Like, you ain't gonna get a good therapist. Of course, you got to do the interviews, but like, you know, a good therapist knows what type of conversation to have with children. And so what I want to say is, we have to, beyond just being on pins and needles, I think we actually have to build different infrastructures in our households and in our families and in our communities that support and nourish, right, young people, so that when these moments come, right, it's not triple, quadruple trauma on top of trauma. They've already dealt with some of the other stuff. This might come up, and then they can handle it, and still, and there's no handling it. Let me just say that. There is no handling it, right? It's never perfect. So my thing is, how can we talk about also the therapeutic skills or the possible healing?
To have positive coping mechanisms. Go ahead, Starsky.
Yeah, I really appreciate that term, Jeffrey. That turn, and I, you know, I'm in a city where I get to see brothers like Jeffrey and Blake kind of do this in their own family. So I'm grateful to have that proximity to them. For me, one of the gifts I talked earlier about, you know, things I learned from my wife and her family, is this idea that when she grew up, they didn't have a lot of people in and out of their house, unless, say for a couple of occasions, when people ran into trouble in their homes, were welcomed into my wife's home. So this concept of sanctuary early, right? When we start kind of creating space, the home having to be that space and being the primary space that is guarded against whatever realities, vicissitudes, and vices there are in the world, is something that is a gift to me. And for the sake of Jeffrey's turn, it is also, this is the therapeutic space. This has to be a space and a place where you can both seed healing, and a lot of that I do with reading, because again, I didn't see those conversations. So I invite my boys to invite me into conversation with very intentional reading lists, starting at about the age of 12. So we do the culturally competent reading stuff when they're learning under 12. But at 12, we start talking about the miseducation of the Negro. At 12, they're reading Kevin Powell's The Black Male Handbook. At 12, now 15, my oldest son is reading Breathe by Imani Perry. And so we're starting those conversations. And so the house, the home for us is sanctuary, and that's lesson from a household I didn't grow up in. Not that my household wasn't safe, but this guide and this, from that moment, we're saying this has to be a wholesome space. And in the same way, we need these in community. So sanctuary for me, I met Brandon McCormick at Alex Haley Farm. And every summer, save for this one, for the last 4 or 5 years, we've had a chance to be there with our families, to let them get to know one another, see the kids running around. And one thing I know is, I don't know another place on earth yet where it's that kind of expanse, where if I don't see my kids, I know they're safe. If they on the farm, I know they're safe. And so there's something about building infrastructure in our communities that is sanctuary in and of itself. So our children can run and play and grow, run into people that they don't know, but who love them, and come into contact with them. So that week every year in July becomes a sanctuary week with a broader community in a safe space for my children as well, that has become healing for my boys. That was one of the first places my daughter ever was able to travel. And so I think we got to build in spaces intentionally in our homes with certain practices, but also in our communities that refuse to be, and we're careful about not allowing to be violated by the violences of this community as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. If I can jump in, that's right. Having met Starsky at Haley Farm, and my daughter certainly enjoyed running around with all the young people, and your son included, little Starsky, right? So it was a good place, as a safe place. But to build on that, I think, yeah, in the home, the kind of conversations that we're having, right? With our children, with my wife as an early childhood educator, exposing them to so many things. And so my daughter comes in not too long ago. My wife was like, go sit down and write out how you're feeling about this moment. Because again, we're here in Louisville, Kentucky. We're where we are. My daughter now has a very sophisticated vocabulary to express exactly how she's feeling about these things. So she's using the language of racial trauma to describe how she's feeling, right? And so the fact that she's able to put pen to paper and to write it down and then read it to us, right? And then to have a dialogue about that is a certain kind of conversation that becomes healing. But having over the years put her in certain spaces outside of our home as well. So at the Louisville Urban League, and there's a program actually started by two former students at the University of Louisville, two young women. It's called GLOW, Girls League of the West, and we're just 20-year-old young women talking with these teenage girls, right, about how to process all of these kinds of things that they're experiencing. It's a very gendered conversation, which I think is important too, because it's about all of these kinds of state-sponsored violence and all of that they're experiencing, but as it intersects with all the kinds of sexist, experiences that they're experiencing in the world in general, right? And so all of the kind of things that my daughter is experiencing in schools in terms of sexism along with racism, but also given her particular class reality as the daughter of two very professional, right, parents, that within Black communal conversations about, well, oh, you think you're better, oh, and she's light skinned, so the colorism, right? And so all of those things held in tension. So the kinds of experiences and traumas that she's feeling as the kind of light skinned, you think you're better than girl, right, held in tension also with the kind of racialized trauma of being Black in a wider world that disrespects you. All of these kinds of things are compounded. And so she needs multiple kinds of spaces to be able to engage in different kinds of conversations that can become healing. And that never starts too young. I'll say this and I'll be done. But even my youngest at 4 years old, and we've tried to shield him from so much. But I remember one of the first times that he saw me on the news, and I wasn't even, it wasn't even at the protest. It was just the news had come to interview me in my office on campus. And my son was in the room and he looked up and he said, "Is that you on TV?" I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh," and the first things out of his mouth was, "We've got to protect you." And I just really sat back. I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" "We got to protect you because somebody might try to hurt you." Right. And I was just really taken aback. Like, what did it mean for a 4-year-old to his first, experience of seeing me on TV is to say somebody is going to try to hurt you. Right. And so not just what does it mean, my fear for him, but my fear for him that he's fearing for me. Right. And not being able to come back home and that. So all of those things are in the mix together in terms of our fears and anxieties about parenting Black children in this moment.
So I'm gonna take the trauma piece to a different spectrum, and again, being from Nashville, being from Knoxville, living in Nashville, and again to Mr. Lee, Mrs. Lee, the condolences for their loss. Trauma shows up for me before I became a parent in having a best friend that was killed by gun violence in 2018. Another close friend in that same clique was killed a year and a half, maybe a little bit later than that. Up until the time I became 21 years old, I had witnessed more death of Black men that I went to school with, that I was associated with, than weddings. So that trauma and taking that trauma into what does it mean to not project that onto my son has been or was very challenging to me. So when I talk about the train of thought and controlling and navigating my son through this train of thought so he doesn't see the trauma that I had to go through, this is still, life's lessons that I'm still learning. Oftentimes, me and some of my friends that have kids now, there have been certain points of times where we probably were broken men, even before we became fathers, that we're trying to build back ourselves up because, again, I didn't have a father in the home. I had uncles. I had a close uncle, right? But they didn't live in the home. I would see my uncles on the weekends or maybe 2 weekends down the road. So me coming from a place of trauma with not having the father in the home, of seeing friends getting killed, murdered, going to jail at a young age, the trauma of being 18 and being like, hey, we made it to 18. We living now. Hey, we made it to 21. We may be doing something now. We made it to 30. Bruh, we are actually doing something. We have survived, we have made and bypassed every statistic. It's still something that I am trying to steer my son away from, that construct of surviving, just being to survive. I don't want my son to have to deal with the construct of just surviving. I want to be able to have him to be a critical thinker, that he creates his own construct. I want to be able to let him understand the realities of what takes place in this country without breaking him down to be like, okay, I'm either going to be treated as a Black American or I'm going to be treated as this type of American. I want him to create his reality. But I know that within my community, that is not always an easy proclamation, when many of the men that are raising kids right now are coming from broken places and are still dealing with traumas from past childhoods. That as much as I want to say, yeah, man, I need to go see a psychiatrist or someone, you know, the day-to-day life is not allowing me to do that. Right now, as much as I want to break down and probably cry and say like, damn, I just can't take this anymore. My day-to-day has not allowed me to be able to do that. So I'm trying to steer my child to be able to critically think for himself and be able to steer him along, both of them along, where they don't have to witness the construct of Black versus white, so to speak, if that makes sense.
I'm sorry. I just want to say something real quick. I'm glad you said that, because one of the things I was sitting here thinking, and I agree, Jeffrey, I'm 100 with you. Like, I'm all about therapy, right? But I was sitting here thinking, I'm like, when Jeffrey spoke earlier about being intentional, and I think Astrid, you talked about as well, the intentionality of parenting, right? And how we have to be very intentional. But all of us are speaking from very real places of privilege, right? Where we have the time, the access, and the resources to sit back and contemplate what is the next step, right? Like, I've worked in social work in most of my life, and most of my clients are in crisis mode, right? This idea of long-term futuristic planning and calculated steps on how I'm parenting my child, right, they're just not there. They don't have the freedom and the luxury to do that. And so what I'm really struggle with is, how do we, as us, like, we can create these spaces, right? How do we make these spaces available, right, to those who have the same levels of access and privilege to contemplate them and to create them as we do? So I just wanted to throw that out to the group, right, as a challenge. Like, that's something we need to start thinking about, how to move forward in that way.
That's good, Dante. In fact, that's actually my process of thinking, is listening to you all, that intentionality. So we were sitting here and I overheard the girls talking about, I want to go to the pool. There's a pool in our subdivision. I want to go to the pool, but I'm afraid if the police come, I'm going to come back home. They're not afraid of neighbors, right? But quote unquote, the police come because of all of the conversations that we're having. Yet and still, they are three very different personalities. One kid, she catches it with reading and interacting of reading. Another kid, she's just active. So everything that we do, it has to be based around, okay, you have an activity going on, so let's talk through these particular activities. And then we have a third child. I mean, she just runs the breakfast table, the dinner table. I mean, she just talks, right? So we have to figure out, okay, we must have this discussion. We went to the pool, social distancing, right? Had to deal with that. So I could talk with one kid about what's happening. Another kid, we talked about one of the books that she's reading, again, on culture and affirmation and the like. And then the third kid, we're sitting at the breakfast table talking about these are the realities. So I bring that up because we talk about healing and intentionality. Our children are also different, and how we approach these particular topics and conversations and wrestle with these realities have to be done in a way where they can hear us, right? They can hear us. I think also the beautiful part about having to do it 3 times is that they get to hear it 3 times in 3 very different ways as well. So, but intentional about it is very important.
That is really well said. I could not disagree with you at all with that, because both of my kids are very different. Obviously, they're different in age, but I think that kids all are different. And sometimes we have a cookie cutter formula, a universal formula that we think we can, oh, Black men have to be this and Black girls have to be treated this way. And sometimes the way in which we're treating our Black men is the way in which we need to be treating our Black girls, because some of our Black girls have stronger constitutions sometimes, right? We just have to figure it out who our kids are. But to your point around, Dante, around therapy, I'll be honest, and I'm not, anyway, tooting my horn here, but I think that this is one of the ways in which we can do work. And actually, Roxanne Gay gave this to me. She said the best thing that we could do during COVID pandemic, when everybody was stressing out and going through it, she said, give them money and don't have any strings attached to it. Now, I took that and modified it. I gave people money and attached them to my Reiki healer, who is, of course, about $75 cheaper than a therapist who has letters behind her name, right? Or his name, right? But yet and still deals with energy healing, right? Every single person that I sent her to this day, like I get random text messages. I don't know what she did. I don't know what Sister Shaman did. I don't know what Maria did, but she did it, right? Every single person. And we're dealing with these traumas, right? And they're able to kind of see, to take the trauma from within their body, externalize in these very different ways. So I would say that one of the things that we could do as community organizations is think about how we can put inside of our grants, put inside of our programming, put inside of our church programs, yoga, Reiki, other ways of doing spiritual therapeutic work for our communities. The last thing I want to say, because I know we don't have a lot of time, is the one thing that that really somewhat frustrates me sometimes about our conversations as brothers is that some of us don't also have the privilege of only talking about one type of death, right? And what I mean by that is one of the reasons why I have my kid out in Black Lives Matter movement, probably more than any movement, right, that we've been a part of, even the church movement. I have him more outside in the protest than anything. And he went a couple of weeks ago, was because I wanted him to see that some people are talking about trans lives, right? Because I don't know for a fact that my son, who now is a self-avowed 13-year-old heterosexual cisgender guy, in 5 years could have a developmental discovery. And I want him to be affirmed that his life matters, right? I want all of my children to know, right, if they have a girlfriend or a wife or whomever, that those women's lives matter, right? And to be able to talk about them with sophistication. I mean, we wonder about this, right? We get in all these conversations about theology, and I don't believe in that. Well, you don't have to believe in anything, but what you do believe in is when the news tells you that, hold on, Caleb, here's my 5-year-old, right? When the news tells you, here's his name, I guess, when the news tells you that in the first part of the year, 18 major deaths were trans Black women, that is a fact. You ain't got to believe in it, right? It is what is happening, and it's happening at the hands of Black men. And so to start this point, last thing I'll say, like a good preacher with a last note, is that sometimes toxic stress produces toxic masculinity, and we have to figure out what we have to do with that.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Well, when we came from the hospital and thing, and we got home, I was sitting on the couch. My wife was in the bedroom, and I was thinking how I'm gonna get through this. How I'm gonna make sure that my wife don't see me cry. How I'm gonna pick her up, and I can't even hold myself up right now. So what I done was I got down on my knees and I started praying. I said, Lord, you have to give me the strength, because I know you can do it. I got to put my trust in you. As soon as I got up off my knees, I went in the living room, because that's the thing about us men. You know, we don't never show our emotions. We always try to cover them up with something, a smile, hold your tears back, you know, and sitting in there in the front room on the couch, and I came in and I saw about her face. And I cried just as much as she cried. I said, look, we're going to get through this together. You know, I know it hurt right now, but we got to keep on moving. And we did it together with the help of God. You know, he put me out front, but also he put me behind her, because at the time it was just about my wife. It wasn't about me. That's what I thought. But it should have been about both of us. I shouldn't have been behind her. She shouldn't have been behind me. We should have been side by side in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole idea, this strand we've been on around what it means to be a man, what it means to be, you know, how we shape particularly young men connecting with our own sense of masculinity. I've been wrestling with in the sense of preparation for Father's Day and preach, as I had the opportunity to do for today. And I think some of that has to do with not necessarily addressing all the stuff. One of my sons is a creative and an empath. And so sitting down having a logical, rational, linear conversation about this is the type of person you should be, or this is what policing in America is, doesn't work. And it's not the way, to the point of the brothers noting here, to address him at his point of being. My older son, that's the way we can have a conversation. My middle son, it's not the way to approach it. What I get most concerned about with him is something you all are talking about, and I had to go back to in preparation for preaching today, which is Bell Hooks talking about Black masculinity and these concepts of both plantation patriarchy and soul murder. This idea that a lot of the ways that we have come to understand what it means to be a man and to dominate as a man, not to lead, not to be head, which is in and of itself a bad read on scripture, but to dominate, using our bodies to dominate and to oppress others, is stuff that comes out of the same slave culture that policing in America and slave patrols comes out of. So in as much as I hear Black Lives Matter and the movement saying to defund police, educating people in this moment on the history of policing in America coming out of slave patrols, I also I feel the need to interrogate the type of plantation patriarchy that we exhibit as Black men and pass on, especially to our sons, as a way of saying you're supposed to be in charge. And because that in and of itself creates, especially when we combine it with this is how a man is supposed to do this thing, and usually that has to do with covering up emotions, creates in an empath like my creative second son soul murder. The psychological impact of telling him he's supposed to be like something that he's not like. And so I think we have to be careful about that too, because we're met with these violences at points of our own development. So I hear Brother Lee, Father Lee in this context, talking about that loss. And I think about the loss of my brother to community violence, and that being a connecting point of my heart. And I don't see this as outing, but me and Darius are covenant brothers because we recognized very early on in our connection 9 years ago that our hearts were broken in the same place, having lost our brothers to community violence in a way that Mr. Lee lost his son. And so I think being able to talk about those things invites us to life, but it also calls us to interrogate some of the ways we were shaped as men, so we don't damage our children in the ways that some of us do.
So I think to piggyback a little bit off of that, but to even talk about what Mr. Lee was talking about when we first were on, he was talking about needing Black men to stand strong at this period of point in time. but him also talking about how his wife was there with him as well. I think where I have really shaped and changed my paradigm becoming a parent with a strong Black woman. I'm from, Knoxville, Tennessee. She's from Los Angeles, California. We met at Tennessee State University, and understanding her being the balance to me always trying to get my son to do things. I need him to be stronger because of this reason. And her being able to balance me to say, he's 7. Mm-hmm. Relax for a second, ease up just a little bit. Let's go this route. It's vitally important because I'm always, for this time that we've been staying at home for COVID, we got to keep the schedule. We got to do this. We got to make sure he's keeping up on his reading. He's 7. Ease up just a little bit. And the need to teach our young men the balance that is needed with our young girls, our young women, and me as a man with my wife is so invaluable right now. Without her being that balance in my life, in our life, I will be totally shifting down that same toxic, this is what it means to be a man and you have to do this. But that balance has kept me in alignment with where I want our sons to go. And that is something that I want to teach our young men. It isn't less than when you recognize you need the balance of a woman, when you need that balance of different opinions to come in. I mean, that's vital for me.
Yeah, I just wanted to affirm that from what I was hearing from Starsky and Jeffrey both, right? I mean, I was reading recently Charlene Carruthers' Unapologetic, a Black queer feminist mandate for radical movement building, right? And so it's so important that she talks about, as we talk about what it means to abolish policing, right? That does not happen without also abolishing patriarchal violence, right? And that those two conversations are simultaneously happening, that we have to have them together. And so you're reading bell hooks, right, in terms of her feminist understanding of what it means that for us to think about what it means to be men is important. Reading someone like Charlene Carruthers, who's giving us queer lenses to think about what it means to be better men and fathers and husbands. All of these things are important and part of the way in which we do this work of trying to interrupt the kind of policing and domination, right, of Black bodies that we're trying to undo in society and not pass on inadvertently into our children, right, who need us to model something different. So I just want to affirm that. And also I just want to say to Jeffrey, you ain't got to send me no money, but do link me with your Reiki healer, because I want to know how to show my energy too.
And she does online too, so you don't have to be in Chicago. You can.
I just want to piggyback off Astrid real quick. I mean, I think your point of that, showing our sons and young men and young women, right, like that men need this feminine balance through our relationships with women. I think that's one component of it and a major component of it. I would also push, though, that we also need to demonstrate that feminine balance internally as men. Right? Like that we engage not just in that femininity as an external reality, but as an internal way of being in the world, right? And that we understand that as comprehensive masculinity, like this merging of the quote unquote, the masculine and the feminine within one body, and not just as a dynamic between two people. But yeah, definitely.
I think that's the hardest.
I love the conversation, and I'm just thinking about what this would look like in a congregational setting for a brotherhood ministry, right? I mean, my men are planning for men's weekend next month, and I'm like, wow, how could this be packaged so that it can challenge them at that base level of their understanding of who they are and how they live out that identity as Black Christian men, raising sons and daughters, so that we could actually create this new narrative that has to actually come forth if we ought to have any traction and moving the ball forward.
Now you're talking. I can see the conference now, the feminine in me, deconstructing
Well, it has to be there. You have to have it, especially if you're a father of a young girl. You show toxic masculinity around your daughters, she gonna think that's the norm and that's acceptable. Yeah. So when she gets with a toxic man, she's not going to know that there's a different way to be loved.
That's
You
right.
know, and that's one thing that when my daughter came, you know, I mean, I was never a thug. I wasn't no gangster, but I was raised in the hood, and you know, you have to be tough. You can't be a punk, or you know, or you can't let nobody just say what you want and do what you want. And then, you know, I get my little girl, and my eyes kind of opened, and my way of thinking had to start changing, because in the things that I did prior to getting married, I realized, like, whoa, some of that ain't acceptable. And I don't want my daughter to go through that. So I need to be a shining example for my daughter of what a man should be.
Yes, sir.
And then here comes my son.
Yes, sir.
And now I got to be another shining example of what a man should be. And, you know, and that starts right here in my own home, especially with the way they see me, how I treat my wife, their mother, you know, how I react and how we respond, how we deal with things, how we work through things, you know. The old me, prior to being married, prior to having children, that was argumentative, the gotta have the last word, ain't gonna let you out talk me, that person had to go away.
Sir.
Because as you all know, when you get married, you're not winning no arguments with your wife.
No, you're not. No, you're not.
You've got to learn how to lose and lose gracefully and be okay with it.
That's right. You got to know when to hold them and when to fold them.
Right. You know, that first year, I didn't think about that. That first year, I'm like, nah. After that year of getting knocked upside my head a little bit verbally, I'm like, you know what? Let me just step back and see what I'm doing differently.
All right. Let me exercise.
Can I ask one question?
Well, let me exercise.
Sorry.
For the sake of
Dr.
time, I got to exercise moderator privilege, and so I've been reminded by our host that we are running out of time, and so I'm going to ask if each of you would just drop some wisdom seeds in 1 minute on what is something what would you want to share as it relates to Black fatherhood? What would you want your audience to know in a minute? Drop a wisdom seed, and I'll start with Brother Mark Lee, and then hit Darius, then Astrid. 1 minute.
Well, my knowledge is I would like for us to just be kind and love one another, no matter what color, race. You know, it's enough hate already going around in this world. You know, and you got to put God first. That's my thing. You put Him first, everything else will fall into place. You know, your family will be more kind, more respected to you. You know, your friend. You know, just be who you are.
All right. That's word. That's solid. Darius.
Before the call, I was talking with my father. My father turned 80 years old in March. Couldn't go celebrate his birthday because of the pandemic. And it's interesting to hear my father at 80 years old talk to me about something he's never talked to me about before today. He is witnessing the uprising in the streets of America with this generation Y and Z waging the struggle, and how at 80 years old, his experiences of colonialism and then the move to independence in the Bahamas still rises up in him. That quest for dignity and humanity, it's constantly with us. And I would have loved to have heard that conversation before now. I'm grateful to have had it today and want to continue it, but I think we've got to have the conversations with our children as an ongoing part of their narrative and identity, so that they are able to fight and use tools that have integrity, weapons that actually win, and that continue to propel us forward.
Amen. Sowing seed. Ashford.
2 quick books that I'm going to recommend reading. One is a book titled New Visions for Black Men. The PhD brother Akbar is a great book to read. Another one, Countering the Conspiracy. I'm not sure if you can see this. Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys. Another book that is helping us read through mentorship programs so that we can find ways to really work with our young Black males. The things that I'm going to articulate is reading to your kids, making certain that your kids are well read and they read often, and challenging your kids to be critical thinkers. examine everything, question everything, and make certain that they come up with their own self-ideologies and their own self-identities and support them in that.
Ashford, drop those books in the chat so that we'll have them for those.
Will do.
Brandon.
I want to, Mr. Lee, my thought actually comes from this statement as he's facing his own reality of the loss of his particular son. And he said, wondering how he was going to deal with that, he prayed. Oftentimes, due to particular training, we can run to various avenues and approaches. But he began to operate out of a place of faith and a place of prayer. What came to my mind then was that Hebrews 4, that we have this advocate, right? One who has been tempted in every way, so we can go to this throne of grace. So I was grateful in hearing that, because oftentimes, and we need all of the resources highlighted, I think they are all important, but I'm grateful that he operated out of a space of faith. Today we're finding alternatives to faith, and I'm grateful that he spoke from a place of faith. So that's my thought.
Thank you, Brandon Blake. Other Brandon.
Yeah, two Brandons here. Really just for me, just thinking about as a Black father, what it means to cultivate the Black imagination within our children, to give them a real sense of the vastness of the possibilities that are available to them. I think, growing up, I had a constrained sense of what was possible, of what I could be. I hadn't seen much. I came from a small town and my parents hadn't been to college. Now, they gave me lots of values. They gave me that faith foundation, but it's hard to be what you can't see, right? And so what I'm trying to do is try to expose my kids to as much as possible, and saying that all of this whole world is open to you, and give them the imagination and the wherewithal and the confidence to be able to live into the most self-actualized version of themselves that is possible, something where they can find deep fulfillment, connected to a sense of calling, connected to a sense of struggle, right? That they can find and live out of a place of deep joy in life, and trying to fight against everything that's trying to undermine that, whether it's the police, whether it's teachers who don't believe in their possibility, whether it's my own parenting and where I fall short and don't give them the tools that they need, right? Whether it's other children that they're in community with who don't share that sense of imagination and possibility. So I'm trying to cultivate that imagination, that possibility, that sense of calling, that sense of confidence, and that cultivation of joy, and trying to undermine anything or any devil that would come against it.
Amen. Jeffrey.
I felt like you were gonna come to me next. I really, vibe so much of what everyone's saying around imagination. I think of myself as the product of a parenting that was good, but I wish sometimes that my parents had sometimes imagined me like they had never imagined, right? They never imagined that I would be a same gender loving kid. They never imagined that I could have possibly been trans. They never imagined that I might have liked to have been an opera singer. They never imagined any of these things that were possible for me. And so their fight was not always against the things that would injure me most, which were the people who said you couldn't be an opera singer, or you were a faggot, or you were a sissy, or who said boys act like this, not like that, right? They didn't help me with that, right? There was a reaffirmation of that, and they didn't know. And the point that I would say today is that they didn't know, and that sometimes allowing your children to see you fail, and to actually back channel and say that I messed up, that I didn't do it right, right? It's sometimes the work of parenting. And for me, the most powerful work that I've done is the moments when I've said to my kids, okay, I know I did this. This was not quite what I wanted to do. Let me do this better. And then the last thing I'll say is there's a couple books that I would suggest too. New Black Man by Mark Anthony Neal, amazing book. I would also say Breathe by Amani Perry, which Starsky pointed out. I just read it. My son just read it. is amazing. 2 books.
Thank you. Drop that in the chat too, please, for others. Travis.
I think the thing that I've learned since entering into fatherhood almost 10 years ago is accountability and responsibility. And that I have to hold myself accountable to my children, to my wife, because this is the responsibility that I accepted. So that means that a lot of times putting myself second, sometimes third, taking my wants and needs away from the equation so that I can provide and make sure that my children's wants and needs are met, my wife's wants and needs are met. Because on any given day, I can be a selfish individual if I choose to be. But making the decision to choose not to be selfish, to choose to put this responsibility first and hold myself accountable to that. You know, May 11th, I could have been selfish. I could have gotten out the truck. I could have tried to flex my size and been vocal and been aggressive. But the fact that I have people that are relying on me, that I'm accountable for, and I have these responsibilities because my wife didn't ask to be a single parent, made me step back and say, no, there's a different way for me to do this.
Right.
You know, I need to get home at night. I need to make sure I'm home tonight. And, you know, that's the steps that I do. So, you know, the thing that I've really been learning, it's a continuous process to work on, is to be accountable and responsible.
Thank you. Thank you. Starsky.
Yeah, so I want to just 1 minute deal with the reality, this myth and the reality. Number one, the myth that Black men don't take care of their families, don't take care of their kids is a byproduct of a reality of public policy on 2 levels I'll point to directly in this moment. Number one, the carceral system that needed Black bodies and particularly male bodies to work and to make money has stripped Black men and Black fathers from their families, whether they were married or not, stripping Black men out of communities, stripping them out of families. Number two, housing policy, federal housing policy in America in the age of the projects that many of us remember in our memory, that said that you can't get certain government support if there is a man in the household, and if that man couldn't make more than the government support, him choosing to go was him buying into the system of manhood or maleness that said you got to provide economically. So by me leaving, I'm actually providing more economic support to the family than if I stayed, because I ain't got consistent work. So let's talk about how public policy has Black men from families, which means part of Black male parenting today, fathering today, has to deal with transforming and reforming the systems of public policy that have stripped us out of families in the first place. So I want to encourage all Black fathers to have an ethic of community organizing and power building in order to transform the policies that ripped us out of families in the first place, so that we can stay and stand in the places that we desire to be now. And in order to do that, we've got to cultivate, as others have said, creativity and imagination for a different kind of system. On that point, I'll speak to one resource. I encourage you to Google Abolition Theology, Darnell Moore. It is a lecture that my dear brother Darnell Moore gave at Chicago Theological Seminary last year that talked about why we have to construct and curate the creativity for a theology that abolishes the prison system. And it reinforces that the only reason we have it is because we haven't figured out how to care for people where they are. And some of that is how you care for a Black man in the community. So I think we've got to have creativity, we've got to have imagination, but Black fatherhood has to have an ethic of community organizing and power building to transform the systems that are taking us away from our families in the first place.
Deep. Thanks, Starsky. Dante.
As someone who has a daughter and who is married to, like a lot of you, a partner who is, my wife is an OG. She is what she is. But as Black men, I think the thing that I would say that I would like to contribute to this larger conversation is that I would like us to get away from simply trying to tell people or teach people via conversation about a different type of masculinity, right? And I would encourage Black men to teach that alternative form of masculinity by embodying it, right? And I mean that in terms of the ways in which they are intimate with other Black men, right? And the ways in which they are intimate with their children, and the ways we are intimate with our spouses, whatever they may be, that we not simply talk about it, and even in our own discomfort, right? In trying to engage in these new forms of masculinity for ourselves, right? That we do that in public spaces, in private spaces, so that our sons and our daughters can see the possibility, right? And see us engage in the possibility, even at our own discomfort. So that's where I would like to add to the conversation.
Thank you. Astrid.
I think you already came to me, but I'm more than willing to talk, man.
No, I'm losing track of the Hollywood Squares piece there, so I think I covered everybody.
Yeah.
My apologies for losing you all earlier. My Wi-Fi just went on the blink here all of a sudden, so I had to recycle everything. But I thoroughly enjoyed this. I'm going to put pressure on Shrizna. So since she thinks she can just just throw a hook and we're going to jump and say, yeah, we're going to we'll do this for her. So I think we ought to continue this conversation. There's been some serious meat here, and maybe we will have that conference, Darius, of the feminine in me, deconstructing the patriarchy, whatever. But this has been really rich, and I am grateful to you, brothers, for you dropping your knowledge and sharing of your experiences. It just reminded me of some things that I too had gone through, and I did not want to insert my own piece into such a rich conversation, and God probably knew that I probably shouldn't anyway, so I got booted out of the conversation, but now I'm back. But I do hope that we can find ways to pick this up and carry it forward in subsequent conversations, whether it's through Facebook Live or just us having this and trying to put stones in place on how we progress. Naeem Akbar has a catalog of some serious books, so I'm glad that this one was brought forth for our attention. Breaking the Psychological Chains of Slavery is one of his earlier works that was pretty serious. So yes, read, share with our children. Starsky, this policy piece is on point, no doubt, because until we dismantle that thing, we're just going to be reliving history. And so we will not find ourselves free. So I want to invite Shrizna, our host, back into the conversation so she can give our closing remarks.
One word, woo! This was such an emotional experience for me. And this is the first time in our Facebook Live where we did not get questions from the audience. I think that's symbolic to how hungry we are for Black male voices in this conversation. So I cannot say thank you all enough for this time. This is a very intentional time. It's Father's Day, and so you are not just sacrificing any time, you're actually sacrificing your time on Father's Day with your family. So thank you. But as you all can see, this was a very important time for us to hear from you all as Black fathers. So thank you all so much. And Darius and Dr. Welch, it ain't nothing. I'm already talking to my teammates about how we do this conference. First started Zoom and in person. So yes, if you hear from me, it's on and popping because we're ready to go. And part of that, honestly, is there are just so many different ways that we need to enter into these conversations around how do we dismantle racism. And so I am so happy and ready to partner with any one of you all who really want to put this conference together, because Black men do need to come together in an intentional way to have these conversations. But let me say again to each and every one of you, happy Father's Day. There are a whole lot of happy Father's Day and thank yous on our comments. So on behalf of our audience, Thank you so much and happy Father's Day. And to all who are watching, I hope you share this video. And I really do invite you to have these conversations with your family members around what it means to be a co-conspirator and how do we dismantle racism in our society. And this conversation with our Black fathers today is definitely one that you want to include with your family and community. Until next time, God bless you and have a good one. Bye-bye.
Love y'all, man.